Spring has a tendency to
little
warm up.
Thank you.
It's all the hot air in here.
Yeah, that's classic planners, right? Just full of hot air. Yeah. Not- Anyway, we have an elected in the room and an elected online. So, yeah. All right. Oh, where are we at? I need to look at the agenda. Can you see that for a second? Okay, so I'll jump in just to kind of get us going. Tanner Woody has resigned from this group and other groups that he's on just with family obligations and a new baby. So he's taken a step back. So I'm going to get us started. The first thing we actually do need to do today is appoint.
Introduce everyone, go around the room, say hi.
Oh, I suppose we can do that. Thank you, Lynn. See, this is how good teams work. One guy's off on his own track and someone else is thinking smartly. So thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. And with that, why don't you introduce yourself and get us started?
Lynn Schroeder. Carol Bright, I'm City Council Liaison.
Matt Bell with Kittleson and Associates.
Mary Carlson, resident.
Rob Anderson, resident.
Dawn Meany, local realtor, and Robin Wood, resident.
Spencer Crandall, resident. Matt Hasty, MIT.
Chris Myers, planner. Oh, I don't get to go.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead. Who's next? Let's see. We should
Greg Close, Wise Real Estate Advisors and Property Manager for Hidden Springs Retail Center, Westland Retail Center.
Go ahead, Bo.
Both muted.
All right, we'll move on now.
Russell.
Russell Williams, State Farm Agent, right on Highway 43. I'm just observing today.
Yeah, and thanks for being here, Russell.
Councilor Lewis.
Christine Lewis, resident and Metro Council.
And Shatrine.
Hi, Shatrine Craig, Westland Chamber, and also Westland resident.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. So, Lynn, what's next?
Chair.
So we do need to appoint a new chair to help keep us on track. Normally we don't have to do this at meeting 5. Usually that's meeting 1 and we just get to move on, but here we are. I know that we have one interested party who's I've communicated with, and that would be Spencer Crandall. But we can throw out if anyone else is interested as well. It requires a lot of yelling, screaming, hours of homework, or none of that actually.
Occasionally talking to Chris.
Yeah, well, that's true. There is some communication with me on email.
Oh, wait a second.
So do you also take the minutes?
No, the chair does not have to take the minutes.
No, I take the minutes.
Yeah.
So this is,
It's a cush job.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, the real, Katie Candy, the real purpose or not purpose, the real task of the chair is to keep us on task as we move through an agenda, as we all tend to veer off into other discussion points, kind of keep us on track and move us through the agenda in an efficient way so we can hopefully land on time. So I suppose we need someone to sort of,
I don't know, like, as your SAG.
there we go. Is there a second?
I second.
There it is. I suppose we could just call it sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down vote. Does everyone approve of Spencer being the new chair of the Vision 43 working group? I like it. There it is. All right, Doug and Spencer, you have an agenda. I turn it over to you, Chair Crandall. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thanks for your appointment.
Uh-huh.
Played it on. First have a 10-minute speech.
Yeah.
Correct. Get going.
A lot of people.
When I was a young boy, no. All right, so we have our agenda here. And so one of the things actually, before we go into the agenda, I just wanted to clarify on number 3. We have this hour time frame. Talk about, I thought we talked about that subject last time, was it because there's been changes?
Well, it's because we talked through a portion of it, but not all of it.
Okay.
We got through like half the standard we wanted to talk through. through.
So that time we need
back, and we may not need that full hour, but there are some additional.
Sounds great. So we're gonna start with the second item on the agenda, which is the recap from.
And are you gonna bring up the presentations?
The presentation.
I have a slides. I think we can probably skip through the first couple slides. Agenda. I think so. Yes. So, well, this is just the agenda, so I'll just very briefly do the recap. So that'll be the first thing. And then, as we just talked about, there are some design standards that we didn't get through at the last meeting, so that we'll talk about today. And then we have Matt Bell here from Wilson and Associates, they're part of our consulting team. And he will present information about proposed or potential transportation improvements and connections, primarily related to bicyclists and pedestrians within the corridor, particularly to get people to and from corridor. So he'll kind of do the presentation on that one, feedback on that as well, and then just kind of recap next steps with that. So just kind of a reminder on sort of things we've done. I think this slide might be a little bit of a holdover for the last meeting, but we had conducted a previous survey, started to draft some concepts related to mixed use zone that would be applied in this area. Drafted these mixed use zone boundaries. We talked about those at the last meeting, and you all identified a number of changes. And I'm going to show you the changes that you identified on a series of maps. And then again, identified these connectivity options for transportation. So this is kind of a partial recap. So I'm going to mention these are. Yeah, it jumped.
That, which is
Now we're
Every
going
time
two
we
ways.
raise it, it goes forward.
All right, there we go. Okay, cool. So this is just going to be kind of a recap on the modifications we made based on the discussion we had last time. So basically what you're seeing on these maps are the pink are areas that are currently zoned for commercial use. The different shades of yellow are zoned for residential use, and the designations are shown on there. The blue boundary was the boundary we started off with at the last meeting we had, and then the red boundaries are places where this group recommended making some changes. So let's kind of draw the circle around there, and you can kind of see this one. We didn't make a lot of changes, kind of over in the, I get my directions mixed up here, but I think that's actually kind of north, right? North and the left.
I'm sorry.
I feel like Chris did this last time, but by touching the screen.
It's my energy, my aura.
Yeah, you're.
Yeah.
It's strong.
You're not the first to bring it up, man.
Probably won't be the last.
It's why I've risen to such a powerful position here in the city.
So on the northern end, we had added a property over there that I believe is currently being used for. That was, yes. Idea behind that, and then towards the other end, and also east, we added a couple of other properties at that end. So those were the changes that y'all. We made those changes here. I'm just going to keep rolling, but if you have questions or comments, just.
Yeah, I do have a question because I think I was the one that pointed out there is that property next to Burgerville. That is a residential property, but it's been unoccupied for the last several years. So can we just make a zoning change on that?
Well, any property we can propose to rezone, and all of these properties would be rezoned. So the commercial properties would be rezoned from commercial than mixed use. We put a lot of types of development, and yes, we can propose to rezone residential properties to mixed use lot.
And it would go through the planning commission council, it would be a hearing, so people that said, no, don't do that, would have an opportunity to come before the group should say that.
Right, the owner gets a notice.
Yeah.
Not just the owner, but in this case, the
Surround.
surrounding
Also.
So yeah, everyone would have a chance to comment on that. And the councilors would make the final decision.
So a property owner could actually just deny the process and say, I don't want you to sell.
They can object, and then that's something that staff might.
And
This,
my
this,
understanding is the zoning changes and the property owner does not have to do anything.
Correct.
They can keep using the property exactly the way that they had been. But if they decide to do something, it broadens
yeah,
what they're able to do.
It's only a win.
Yeah, and this is going to be a potential apartment village. It's directly across from an existing, and it's a large piece of.
It actually gives the property owner a lot more potential use and.
Yeah.
That property is just not that long ago, and the person who purchased it is.
honestly,
They're probably not.
So they're kind of waiting for something to change.
Probably.
Especially if they're paying attention, know that this is going on.
so for any of these properties, same situation. This is going to be often some changes are initiated by a property owner, in this case, by the city. And this goes out, everybody's got a chance. All that. Sure. All right, next one. So this is another one where we made some recommended changes. Again, you kind of see the areas that are hatched are the ones that we recommended including within this particular focus area, within the potential future mixed use zone. So kind of pulled in some of the properties on Topfield and then also on the east side of out in A Street. Yeah, so those were the changes that we all recommended. And I'll also just note that we presented this information to, we have a technical advisory group, and the same information to them, they would recommend kind of be on the ballot and suggest.
And I will have these focus areas at the planning commission work session next week for their feedback. So it'll be good to get any feedback this group has and present to the next Wednesday.
This is across from the old fire. This is, that gets right there.
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah.
That's where the arrow is. Okay.
Yes,
Just wanted to make sure I remember.
Yeah, in fact, Russell, who is online right now, that's his building, right, basically right there on the corner at that, right there.
Okay.
So he has a vested interest in it, but for sure.
Yeah.
Matt, if I make a quick transportation plug.
Sure.
The previous slide actually showed, so if you're changing the zone. We will need to address transportation. Anytime you introduce, and then, or anytime you're increasing the development potential, that's needed. Or essentially the transportation site will need to be addressed. Part of it.
That is a thing we will do. So what that means is we need to look at how does the change in zoning affect the amount of traffic that's generated in these areas? And then will that have some kind of impact on particularly state facilities, Route 43, as well as off ramps to the I-205 if they're close enough to be connected. So that kind of evaluation is done as part of the zone. And if there are significant impacts identified, then identify ways to address this.
That's not something this group does. That's what you do in the city.
That's what, yeah, that's not, yeah. It's
Okay,
something
thank you.
we have to analyze, that the city has analyzed, but that's part of
Right, so we might end up with one thing and then you go, well, we had to chop off this piece because it was going to
It's more likely that what we would say is that based on this change, there will need to be some improvements to this intersection or that intersection, things like that. It's more frequently changes to intersections or improvements to intersections than the side. But those are the types of things that we would identify. Yeah, and we did hear that also when we met with our technical. Said, hey, we're gonna have that we do that. So part of it's already embedded in our plan to do that analysis. So we're just like, and I think want to keep.
I know, I just want to ask one more related question. Are you down zoning anything? You're taking any of the commercial property and not?
I wouldn't say we're downside.
Not at this time. You'd like us to.
I would say let's save that for the future.
So people online, if you have any questions, go ahead and pipe up because we can't see you because we're looking at the presentation.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why not include the properties directly across 43 from Burgerville to be allowed to be mixed use?
Is this Burgerville right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, those right there. Why not?
Well, right
Doesn't mean
now,
they need to be changed, but why not allow those to be mixed use?
Okay. Oh, there's a hill?
Isn't it already, commercial right in?
the corner is a law office.
Right here.
Yeah, and then it goes into single family residential.
I think for the most part, we did not highlight smaller, single family lots with smaller lots with single family residence. For the most part, we didn't include those in the boundary. It's for the same reason we didn't make the whole corridor proposed mixed use zoning for the entire corridor. Kind of focus in our efforts on areas that already either have commercial zoning or have commercial uses, or would make, just I will say kind of more sense in terms of proximity to those. I mean, those would be proximate, but there are also half a dozen properties with individual homes on them.
Yeah.
And that didn't seem like necessarily the most efficient way to draw this out.
Yeah.
But
When we do the
not to say we
zoning,
couldn't.
when we do the zoning change, because those properties are in proximity to what we're proposing, those people would be noticed.
Yes.
And so they could come to the planning commission and or the city council and say, I would like to be included in this mixed use, right? So these lines on the map are not necessarily the done deal.
Correct. And I'm actually bringing these to council on May 2nd for a work session. So we'll get feedback today, we'll get feedback from planning commission next week, and then I'll see you guys a few weeks from now. And we're hoping to, right, I know, sorry, but we're hoping to have that kind of dialed in by the end of the day, May 2nd, have an idea of what they're actually going to be.
Yeah, because you'll get feedback from planning commission and from city council, but
Yep.
again.
But they could come in later, yes.
They can
Yes.
still say.
Yep.
Help me in.
Shatrine, did you have a comment?
Nope, sorry, I was just coughing. I apologize.
Okay, so.
All right.
So this was focus area 3.
Focus area 3. So again, this was an area where this group recommended pulling in some additional properties, kind of along the lines of the last comment. We did recommend including these properties that are across the highway from the fire station down there. Yeah, along Avenue A Street, excuse me, as well as some of the properties in the area that's pointed to just north of Coffee or east of
And
Coffee.
those that are already
And
apartments,
those
right?
were already, developed for higher density housing in that area. So, and the ones kind of adjacent to the highway are what's it called? Patterns there, but yeah, that seemed to make sense in terms of just the size and some of the opportunities for redevelopment there. Let's see, and then this is sort of the last one that we're looking at. So this is another one where we pulled in some additional properties here so that we made the dividing line first court, kind of on the, again, north end of the area, as opposed to sort of splitting the line across those property lines. So that was the rationale there, I think. And then also including those properties that are directly across or directly west, excuse me, of Beatty Street, next to Hughes Street. Yeah, so kind of modest increases there.
Because there's already some commercial use
Already
in that.
use, yeah, in that area as well. So it's kind of consistent with how we generally identify properties that include mixed use zones. All right. So I guess just any other thoughts on the maps before I recap the rest of the things we talked about. All right. So we started to talk about some of the elements of the future mixed use zone. We talked about permitted uses, and then we talked about a number of development standards that tend to sort of provide regulation for guidance about where properties are located or where buildings are located on the site, the distance from the buildings to the street, things like that. So we had a number of comments that y'all made around that. So suggestions around the types of businesses or uses or residential things that are allowed. One pretty clear recommendation was make sure childcare businesses are allowed or childcare facilities are allowed in these areas. And actually, that's something we hear in a lot of places. That's a really important part of just economic development and services for people both working in any place. So that was pretty strong. Prohibit storage facilities was another suggestion. Make sure we're thinking about healthcare uses, and if those aren't something that are allowed within that we weren't already considering being allowed, make sure that those are allowed at least at some scale. Maybe we're not looking for like a large hospital facility to be located here, but at least doctor's offices, clinics, things like that. And then we also asked you all explicitly about what we've described here as maker spaces. So those are places where people are making things at not a large scale manufacturing facility, but a smaller scale craft type of facility. Those are, I will say, you don't see an explicit definition of those in a lot of cities development. So that's something we will find those, but there was very strong support, I think, for this group to make sure those types of things are allowed. And then the standards we did talk about, and we'll talk about other ones in a moment, but the things we did talk about was whether or not we should require a certain amount of the ground floor uses to be retail or commercial businesses. And if so, where? And the general recommendation, we didn't come up necessarily with a number, although we talked about some numbers. But what we said was we should require at least some of the ground floor frontage or the buildings that front Highway 43, at least a percentage of those should be retail or commercial uses. So we need to come up with a percent, but some of that should be required to be that. But on sort of the sides, on the streets that connect to Highway 43, it's less important that we require that. We're going to allow it. Any of those could be that use, but not necessarily require it. There's kind of a lot of discussion behind that, but that was the recommendation.
So I have a question. Can you, if somebody comes in to do any kind of redevelopment, can we require that they do mixed use? Like, instead of somebody coming in and say, I want to redevelop this single story building, and it's another single story, but can it be required that it has to have a higher, greater use in this location?
So you can. There's a couple of different ways to do that, and we haven't really talked about that yet. It could be something we can talk about today, but one of the ways you can do it is you can have a minimum height requirement. And Another way you can do it is through what's called floor area ratio. The floor area ratio is essentially you're dividing the square footage of the buildings on the site by the square footage of the site itself. So if you go over, if you have a required minimum floor area ratio of more than one, that's going to sort of say you've got to have more than one story buildings across the whole site to hit that floor area ratio. So you can kind of vary that. Cities do that. I don't believe Westland has a floor area ratio requirement anywhere.
We do in residential.
Oh, you do it, right?
In
Okay.
residential. So another way to approach that we do in residential development is if you tear down a home and want to rebuild it, there's a certain point at which we don't consider it a rebuild, it's just a new build. If you need to replace the foundation, well, you're not rebuilding anything because you took the foundation out. Now you're literally building from scratch. So there's ways to find thresholds that require some sort of different redevelopment, which we should probably kind of chat about.
And you can also, rather than require it, you can include incentives or bonuses.
Right.
You know, if you do X, you can have a taller, have more area. Yes.
Just to verify, along the other areas that are not on 40, they would be allowed to develop.
Yes. Yes. Commercial / mixed use. Yeah. Kind of forward use. Yeah.
So, and one of the things that we gently talked about, and I don't want to veer us off track, but, you know, what are we going to require? So we're having an internal discussion right now about sort of subzones, right? That's like literally burst of blood vessels and bringing a new concept in.
Wait a second. I just try to just
Right.
stay calm.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Find your happy place, Matt. It's just, can you go back to the one with Old River? Yeah. So at the top of the screen, the property on the corner, if we require that to be mixed use, and it's the first property that wants to redevelop, that might be problematic.
Yeah.
Right? But commercial use on that corner might not really do it. Maybe as part of a larger context. So we kind of need to keep sussing out where within these zones are we going to require commercial uses, how much of a commercial use, and we're going to require housing, things of that nature. So, you know, just there's a lot of moving parts.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Probably on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had to want to know in a bit.
Yeah.
So we have so just to kind of round out the things, a recap of what we talked about last time. So one of the things we talked about was where we require ground for commercial or retail or active uses. Sometimes that's not necessarily a business, but it could be like a gym or it could be something like that. You know, just you're seeing activity within those spaces. I got that synergy walking around outside and seeing people doing things within the building. So anyway, we also asked about should we have any maximum lot coverage requirements. The answer was no. There are other standards that are going to guide or lead to a certain maximum lot coverage requirement. We can do that. We asked about the approach to maximum heights and should it be sort of the same maximum height throughout or should it vary? And what we heard folks was it should vary to some degree so that in part we've got some power buildings on 43 and some step down towards areas around this area that tend to have lower heights. So we've got some transition there. And then the other thing we asked about was setbacks, so the distance from the property line basically to the building. Should that be the same throughout or should we vary that? And sort of a similar answer to the height, which was that particularly along the highway frontage, we should look to have buildings closer to the street. And so the maximum setback there might be relatively small, although we want to also have the opportunity to have like courtyards or gathering spaces or things like that. So we want to encourage those opportunities, but we don't want a 40-foot setback, let's say, you know, in the back of the sidewalk to the building. But along those, again, other streets within the area, less important, and maybe it's more important to allow some consistency along where buildings are located relative to the street in those areas. So think more about kind of matching that and not, and allow partners setback there. So those were the things that we talked about last time. All right, so that is actually the end of my recap.
That's the end of the recap. So we're only 10 minutes. All right. Well, then we're on to number 3, zoning concepts and proposed boundaries.
All right. So, and I think the boundaries we actually already kind of talked about. So, but we do have some additional standards that we wanted to review with y'all and talk about those things. So there are already a number of existing standards that would apply to, typically apply to commercial or mixed use. And so I'll talk about those a little bit and just see if you have any thoughts or comments about those. I mean, our assumption is these are things we would continue to incorporate in the mixed use zone. So one is that you locate parking either behind or to the side of a building. You don't have parking lots or parking spaces between the sidewalk and the building, particularly kind of along 43. So it's either next to the building or behind it. So that's a pretty typical thing to do in a mixed use area. The second is that you have requirements to ensure that you've got places for people to walk within the site, particularly from parking areas to a building or through the site, so that people have good, solid pedestrian connections through the site and ability to walk around the site, circulate the site. So those are things the city already requires. We continue to require those things here. The other is that the main entrance to a building faces the main street that the building is located on. It's not to say you can't have a second entrance or another entrance, like in the back of the building off the parking lot, but that part of the idea is that, you're going down this street, you want to see a way to get into the building, you want it to be kind of an inviting pedestrian environment. So that's a pretty, again, standard kind of urban design standard. And then also that you do some things with the design of buildings to create more kind of a human scale than any development along this way. So that's partly done just by like how you design entryways into buildings. Again, if you're on the street or on a corner or hangs into a corner, things like that, that you've got kind of, it's not one huge long wall. The building isn't. It's got some breaks for some variation in the facade, so things don't feel quite as massive. And so those are some of the things we can do to promote that kind of human scale design aspect of things. And then the other thing that I talked about a moment ago, but it also mentioned this is transitional step backs. That just means that the height of the building is stepping back as you're moving away from, again, like the adjacent area. So, so those are all kind of things that are already embedded in some portions of the city's code that we assume we incorporate here as well. So I'll take a quick pause. Does that all make sense? I can agree to not give any of these things. Yes.
So I apologize if this is an ignorant question, but if these are the existing standards, then how is it we have all these parking lots in front of?
Because these standards have not been in place, or some of these standards have not been in place that long, or a lot of things were built prior to these standards. Not in the future.
I have concerns just looking at this because these are residential lots. A lot of them are residential lots or smaller lots. If they stay retained by an individual owner and are bought without being bought in conjunction with neighboring properties, what I see by what you're saying here is you can't have any parking up front, so you have to have some way to get around to the back. Well, if I own, and I'm just going to pull one out in the middle here. I own this property in the middle. How am I going to get around to the back of that parking lot? And when I look at now building my building, I have to have so much room for a driveway to go down the side, to get down the park. And then let's say this guy now needs to do the same thing, and this guy needs to do the same thing. So now I'm going to have a pedestrian walkway with multiple driveways coming out. That I see as a problem moving forward versus somehow either a parking area that will accommodate that block or something. That's just that's not a monkey wrench. I'm throwing it out there for you.
Okay.
Because when you look at having something, you want a nice pedestrian block, that's a nice pedestrian block. You can go into those different shops. It's fine if everybody develops at the same time and you have a great parking behind it. But if I'm one of the first or second to develop, and now I can't build my building because I don't have enough room to actually make it work for me financially, because I need to leave a 30-foot section on the side to make a parking lot. It's just, I think you're going to run into more development issues than you're really aware of right now. And then also just the aesthetics and the safety of having multiple driveways coming out of what we want to be a nice pedestrian area.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah,
Good point.
I mean, I think good points. I think this really is geared to assuming you're not gonna have to develop a small property at one time, and that it's gonna be more development, consolidation and development of multiple properties.
I agree. If
So
you have,
I think that's sort of
Yeah.
the assumption or important idea.
well, I
But think
agree.
you make good points. I don't
Yeah.
have an answer. But it's saying it's
Yeah,
But
if you,
we do need to address that.
a good
Yeah.
thing to think about.
Yeah.
Think about.
Yeah.
You know, it's some
Well,
of
the
these-
winner's not gonna do it. They'll just be like, well, I don't want to put this driveway here. I need to wait until so-and-so wants to
right,
sell
it's
to
gonna
me.
stall.
Which is actually what happens generally in development, except there's that one house that's like, I'm never gonna sell. But other than that, they usually tend to be able to consolidate. I mean, it makes sense.
And there are gonna be people who develop who want to have parking units required. In this case, city's already eliminated a lot of parking requirements in these areas, so somebody won't have to do it, they won't have to buy parking, but if they need to make the.
I'm a
development, that's
business
allowed.
owner and I want to start a hot yoga studio. If I don't have parking, I'm not, my business isn't. Yeah, so, I mean, these are all just kind of things I deal with this on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, these are really
Great
great.
question.
This is why we had
And so I don't have any of this stuff, but it's a thing that. Yeah, some of these things we're not gonna solve today, but.
Yeah.
somebody back to our subject.
Well, no, but it does lend to that redevelopment of what are now residential.
Yeah.
Single properties. It's challenging at best, which is why we try
Why
to
we
not
can't
have so
see-
many of those.
Yeah, we don't have too many of those to go on. I know.
Well, and I don't know if this is, I'm just gonna throw this out there, just as a free part, but if the city purchases, maybe one of these strategic properties and it's city parking. It's city parking. Public, like a public but paid, city, public, or I don't know, just.
All right, any other comments on, don't do it?
Oh,
Transportation.
Talk about parking.
I know, you let's. Not Bill.
No, I'll save my comments for.
We have a few other solutions.
Well,
Well, but we do need to keep going, so I don't want to.
We have
new things, stick around.
I'll just say, the city does have a mechanism for access to consolidation of time, particularly whenever it has to do with access to, so between the city and ODOT, they would be looking for crossover easements, consolidation of those access points, even as different developments are occurring.
It doesn't solve the problem.
Doesn't solve
You've got one, like what you're talking about, the one property. Access to that property.
We want to see this development happen.
Yeah.
But yes.
20 years.
All right,
20 years.
any other,
It's a slow.
yeah, any other thoughts or comments on this set of things? Next one. So here are some other things that we can think about in terms of design standards, which are often applied. These are things that are not already in the city code for this area, but that we could apply to this mixed use area. So I'll describe each of these and then see what kind of thoughts or comments y'all have. So first is requiring different types of materials for the first story of a building. So for like the facade of a building, so that you're really kind of emphasizing especially if that's going to be retail or commercial. It looks different, and it also just kind of varies the architectural designer for that, right? So that's one thing to think about. Some unique designer materials for the first floor. The second is, again, for those ground floor uses, and this could be applied to upper stories as well, but to require a minimum percentage of transparency, which basically means windows, windows or doors with transparent surfaces. And that's a pretty typical standard in like often downtown or mixed use, downtown commercial areas or mixed use areas, because you again want people to kind of be able to see in and out of buildings, partly for safety, but partly just to kind of invite into the area you're in. And sometimes there are those minimum transparency requirements for upper stories, but they're kind of, so on the ground floor, you might have a transparency requirement between like 50 and 70%. And on the upper floors, maybe it's somewhere between 25. And this graphic gives you a little bit of a sense of that. You can see really large windows on the bottom floor. You can see kind of smaller windows above.
Might just keep somebody from building a big slab.
Yeah, I mean, it's for a couple of reasons. One, they kind of, again, increase that transparency, energy, like it's a super planner, planner phrase, items on the street, kind of safety purposes, inside your front of your building. And then also, yeah, just to vary the facade of the building. So it's not one big plan. So that's one to think about. The other is to require a minimum height for the ground floor to make sure it can accommodate retailer commercial uses or restaurant uses, things like that, that do require more ceiling height to accommodate HVAC facilities and things like that. So that if somebody starts out with maybe residential on the ground floor, in the future, it can accommodate it. Food service kind of use. So that's another one. Minimum building frontage would be that you require a certain percentage of the building to be built up to that kind of setback line, but that the facade of the building could vary so that you allow for, again, some courtyards or gathering spaces or things like that. So you don't require the whole thing to be setback, but you require a certain percentage of it. And then kind of a little bit the flip side of that is that to the extent people are providing these kind of open courtyards or plaza areas or things like that, that you have some standard for what goes in there. That at least a portion of them be landscape, that they have some, often this is through like a menu sort of thing. Here's a menu of features and you have to have at least 3 of these things within any place like that. They can construct lights, benches, etc. So that's a type of standard we could include. Landscaping standards, that can vary anywhere from a minimum percentage of the site is landscape to you must provide a mix of different types of landscaping, trees, plants, hedges, ground cover, etc. And then the other would be public art amenities. You could require or create some kind of city program for public art on site. So these are all kind of additional standards that we could create into the new mixed use. So I'll stop talking, see what you think about this. Any comments on these? Good idea, bad idea, anything that causes concerns or anything you love that you could have.
Well, I would think I would look at like the part of it is just like the vibe that we want for this, but the other piece is like the developer resistance to things. So like if there are things on here that I go, well, developers are going to go, this is fine, this is fine. Like I think we should probably do it. But have it be a requirement anyway, like the transparency and the minimum height of the ground floor. But maybe there's other things that might like cause them to have second thoughts that are on this list. I don't know what those would be. But.
Well, I'm going to take a lot of what we're talking about. So we have 4 or 5 different large commercial developers that we're friendly with and ask for their feedback specific. Like, would this keep you from developing a future property?
So developers that already do work.
Yeah, ROIC, Graymore, folks like that are here in Westland already. If we did X, would that make you walk away from a project? So we want the developer feedback. I mean, Greg is on who represents the Wise family. He may not be ready to comment on that kind of stuff, but these are the kinds of things that we want to hear from the developer side. And it's a big concern of mine is that we over standard our code to where people are like, this is just too much. I'll just go somewhere else. That's my big fear. But I look at these and I see these as being pretty, these are not particularly complicated. I mean, a 14 to 15 foot first floor commercial is pretty standard.
Most of these things are fairly standard.
Yeah.
But, you know, well, and I want to be able to go to the community and say, hey, we put the pedestrian plaza requirements in here because you all want to gather places. So that's the piece on the citizen side,
right,
that you like to have.
Do we not have a public art requirement in Westland?
We have a public arts commission, and I think it's major projects put 1.5% to it.
There, and it's a percentage of public projects. that
Correct.
The city does, and it goes into a fund. So right now, a kiosk is being created for Lima Falls Drive. That's where people can stop and work on their bikes, like if they get a flat tire or whatever.
Yeah.
But they're building a kiosk that is a piece of art.
Nothing, there's nothing.
So there is some ongoing, and I won't go off the rails too far. Megan, our Parks Director, and myself were at the Arts Commission a month or so ago. There is a multi-jurisdictional art discussion about a Willamette River installation from Lake Oswego through all the way to Oregon City on Highway 43. So they're having these discussions amongst all of the jurisdictions about doing a big art installation that would travel through 6 or 7 miles worth of Highway 43. So everyone seems to like it. It's now just a matter of who leads it, how much money, all that kind of stuff. So it's something that we're aware of. And when we took council to, what was the second, Boone's Ferry, Lake Oswego for about a mile stretch of Boone's Ferry did a total overhaul. And there's a lot of really good art and design that you look, it's very interesting, and it's on the side of a 4-lane road. So we know there's a lot of value to that, and anyone who's been through planning school or design school knows that. But yeah,
Some of it's adjacent to the sidewalk, some of it's in the end of the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's right.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
So why would Lake Oswego buy into this? Because,
they love art in Lake Oswego. They spend a fortune on it.
oh, no, I know that. That their portion of 43 is really short. It's like nearly the university.
Well, no, it goes all the way to all the way to the basically it goes all the way to Summit Bridge. Yeah. It's a very
Could I
long
say-
stretch.
Could I say something?
Oh yeah, please do.
Hi, I'm actually on that board, on the Arts Council board.
Oh,
And
what's-
so, yes, it's been a great discussion. Lake Oswego is absolutely on board. But I would suggest if we were talking about having I love the thought of bringing art and having that for a builder to look at, but maybe we put it in a spot that gives it an option, to see if they'd lean in. So like I saw, what was it, landscaping, different things like that. If they want to be a part of the public art piece, I think the goal would be, we're also thinking along the line, arts and tourism. So you have people stop because there'd be an integral, like when we think long-term, there'd be maps that would lead people there and connect them to the art and different things like that too.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps a little bit.
Oh, thank you, Shatrina. And I forgot you were on that commission. My apologies. Yeah. And I think that's a really, as Matt has suggested, there are things where we can offer, bonuses or discounts on X, Y, and Z if you install art. So there's ways to get there without them having to put in a bunch of money. But it's what kind of commitment do we as a city want to put forward?
I have a question about the plaza and pedestrian plaza. Yeah. So are the type of requirements like, if you're going to build a building of this size, then you would have to have X kind of public space?
There's a couple different ways you could approach it. That would be one. Size that is 70% of the site be some kind of communal or common space outdoors. And then the second would be, then if you do that, it can't be just all asphalt. It
Right.
needs to it needs to incorporate certain amenities or a mix of things within that space that we develop. And again, that's tends to be sort of, there's gonna be some basic, this is how it tends to work. I've seen some basic requirements about the mix of hard and soft surfaces, and then a menu of things that you say, pick these things off the menu, you do the menu you want, but you gotta build these. And again, this might be benches, it could be public art, it could be. Yeah, it could be landscaping. I mean,
Soften it up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all these things, for the most part, would help it to be a more successful commercial area, which then would seem like if I was a developer, okay, well, I'm glad they have these standards because it might make sure that my tenancy is good and stuff.
I mean, it is meant to make it a more inviting,
Yeah.
very pleasant place to be. Pretty much all these things, and just things that people are getting into. Other thoughts on any of these? The next slide is.
So Greg's got his hand up. Yes, but here.
Just the feedback in terms of the private investment development real estate side. I don't see anything in the concepts or standards that's going to give any private developers second thoughts around being engaged and involved here. It's interesting planning, and I do see the developer input as critical, and they will blend. They'll be attracted to additional density and massing availability on particular parcels. And typically, they'll be very sensitive to architectural design standards, community place, and have real value by designing something much more interesting and connected than not. I think it's partly a matter of doing many case studies on certain sites to determine if the site characteristics meet pretty well a pretty tall building in an area that hasn't seen a pretty tall building in its history. And do we have the kind of length and width for a particular size massing that's consistent with this? And that's the architectural piece. This is a high level standards and guidelines that can be adapted through the corridor, but it will need to, for something like this to be realized, it will of course take a fair amount of time, and it will need to be economically feasible. And so those more micro feasibility studies issues come into play. And I do think it would be real valuable to have someone like Graymore, who's done some sizable mixed use projects, in this fairly nearby community, and others. And so to the extent this committee, our group, is doing some reach out to some of those folks, and you'd like a little bit of additional assistance with that networking and coordinating and so on, I'm happy to do that, outside of any meeting we might have. But so far, we do a lot of development financing and private equity, and I've seen a lot of projects, and I've seen a lot of urbanization in former suburban areas, and I haven't seen anything with our concept so far that would cause me any pause from a feasibility standpoint. We will have a couple of questions in terms of long-term for existing commercial uses, just out of pure selfishness, owning some existing commercial. If the zoning changes are in effect and we lose a part of our building to an insured casualty, will we be precluded from rebuilding the existing single story, as we're still in the cycle that it hasn't yet lent itself to full redevelopment? That's always a concern when you're considering zoning changes around existing uses, but that's a question we can come to later. But generally, from a real estate standpoint, I think this is some really good work, and I think it'll be well received.
Great.
That's great.
Greg,
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts on what Don said about the parking for the smaller lots?
Well, it's, we planning planning variables are so many and we have the kind of the macro issues, and then we've got the micro issues that we apply to specific buildings and specific parking lot and a specific existing or historic use. And for the goods and services, for real estate to support the goods and services, you've got to have a feasible transportation network and you've got to provide for parking. And I don't see at this stage of the economic cycle a way around, a municipality to very significantly limit vehicular traffic. Even planning for 20 years out. Now, I don't know, and I think that's the right way to go, but for these times in the fairly near-term future, parking is key. We represent around the metro area, we represent 1,500 businesses that are commercial tenants in buildings. And the great vast majority of those, whether they're semi-urban or full suburban, remain and do not see a change in need from a customer base for alternative modes, that completely fully discounts the automobile. Yes, we have tremendous growth in pedestrian, bicycle, other modes, mass transportation, but we're still dependent on the car. And I don't have anyone in my cluster of businesses, but whether they be yoga shops or anything in the healthcare or the retail or the services side, that isn't still pretty fully dependent on the automobile. The trick is to try to plan specific properties and specific neighborhoods, and in this case, a full corridor. You've got the opportunity to replan this corridor so that we're clustering things where we've got groups of uses that might congregate off of specific sites and have enough transportation harmony to link together. So it's not inconvenient if you're driving your car, to get fairly easily to the adjoining property and take advantage of a service, some goods or services right next door without pulling out and driving next door, eighth of a mile and parking a whole second time. These are not easy solutions, but it's kind of it's plan as you go and plan for the future. And I think what we're looking at here, if I take a standard site along our corridor that's got the availability for a really nice new mixed use planned development, similar to the picture we see here, much more frontage to the highway, some pedestrian linkages, probably some central drive access through the middle front or around the side to have parking in the back. I see that as, if sufficiently parked, as something that ought to be very attractive and very highly feasible to the development community going forward, particularly if they can avail themselves of 3-level density and have enough rental space to really make a big redevelopment like that work. I can see this working. But again, some of our sites are pretty narrow, and so we're probably looking at smaller clusters of these kinds of interesting, slightly taller buildings than one large one, say.
Okay, all right, thanks.
That's good feedback, Greg. Thank you.
Any other?
There we go.
So any other thoughts on this? I mean, a number of comments generally saying, yes, I think what I've heard is generally these things make sense. We do need to sort of think about those smaller, narrower sites for challenging park in the back. So I've heard that. Also just let's make sure we do sort of check with the development talk to, so that's awesome. But any other thoughts on these standards?
I don't really want to add more. Because he brought up parking, right? Like, is that something that you just sort of hope that they do, or what, how does that fit?
So I'd say a couple things. One, again, per some of the recent state requirements, there are certain areas where the city cannot require a certain amount of parking. But the tendency, and Greg, I think, really hit on this, is that business owners and developers need parking. We're not yet in a car-free world, maybe. And despite a desire to, it increases in people getting their places to be walking or biking. There's going to be a need for parking. And the folks who are out there developing things know that. And they know they can't sell or rent income from the developments unless they've done it so far. So our sort of point is more about like where to put the parking, how to design access to properties. And so not to make the parking and the car be a barrier to people walking to the site. And that's why we can say, let's not put the parking lots between the sidewalk and the building, because then people walking have to walk across the road.
Just no quantity requirements or anything.
Yeah, in this area, I don't think they're maximum. Yeah, there's maximums, but not in terms of quantity, but the maximums are one, I won't say they're relatively high, but they're kind of within the realm of what gets built. The maximums tend to be based on the minimums, they're like percentage above the minimum. So, but there's no, not going to do minimums, but that does not mean it.
Yeah, I mean, the minimums are pretty prohibitive to some businesses as well. Speaking to ROIC, this development up here, they actually wanted 2 more buildings sort of up against us along the road, but the minimum parking requirement, they couldn't get there. So this development in itself would have 2 other commercial buildings if it weren't for minimum parking requirements back in the 90s. So now those are removed. Maximum does allow more flexibility.
Yeah, they're better to have those.
Yeah, the other thing about sort of parking area requirements is sort of back to that pedestrian circulation. When there's the halfway through the parking lot and landscape. So that they look reasonably attractive, capturing the storm water. And you can get through them safely.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, well, actually, we made a incredible, even, I'm sorry about that. You can always, we finish your next piece early.
I'm really glad we're ahead because I think this next piece is going to take so long.
All right.
Transportation connectivity and recommendation.
We do have your stuff in there.
Well, let's see, with that introduction, I need to calibrate myself a little bit. So did we talk about transportation? We didn't really get to transportation.
No, it's not.
Okay. So, I'll start off by saying that there's a lot of work has been done to really define the transportation system and goes back. And so the first few things I want to talk about are some of those documents and sort of shaped what we've been looking at and more than likely go over that. So first, most folks might be familiar with the transportation system plan. This is the 20-year plan. Identifies plans, policies, strategies, and different ways of accommodating growth. When we get to the maps, you'll see here in a little bit that a lot of the projects in the transportation system plan tend to focus on higher classification streets, so arterials and collectors, and on neighborhood streets for Westland. And then and it tends to be pretty specific about what it is we're trying to identify on its facilities, sidewalks. The 43 concept plan is a little bit more recent. The planning effort kind of came in at the tail end of the TSP, and it really defines what Highway 43 looks like from the north all the way down to the south. It has a very specific set of features that it's proposing out there. For folks that aren't familiar, it's looking at a consistent 3D cross section. It has sidewalks and bike I should say, sidewalks and separated bike facilities on both sides and things like enhanced transit facilities. It does also identify a few ways to improve intersections, like safe around intersections, enhancing certain types of intersections, and then reconfiguring things to be more bike. So those two plans, city plans, have been on the books for a little while and kind of figured shape sort of what we're looking at. Next, we have the Robinwood and Bolton neighborhood plans. These have been around since the early 2000s. These are, I believe, largely community-driven plans that really reflect what these communities or what we see in terms of transportation. So my focus in the area is on the transportation side. And one of the things, and Christine and I talked about this before, but one of the things that is articulated in that plan is how neighbors want, like what private facilities they want to see. And so, but again, that's early 2000s, things might have changed, evolved over time. So we want to reflect and respect those plans, but we also want to try to provide right type of connectivity, right type of connections, right type of facilities to accommodate folks as they travel along. So our goals here really is improving multimodal connections within to the corridor, informed by community engagement and activity centers. So I don't know if this group participated in it, but Matt and his team did some community outreach. And as part of that outreach, they did some sticker exercises and people went up and down and put stickers in the focus areas along the corridor, really highlighting where they wanted to see new bike ped facilities, new crosswalks, particularly crosswalks. There's a lot of those. And other transportation facilities along the corridor as well as in the surrounding neighborhoods. So those connections really intend to support land use zoning recommendations for corridors, and ultimately we would recommend. Actually, we might need to come back to revisit that last one. The collection of historical documents, the TSP, the concept plan, and Robinwood, combined with the engagement strategy, the information we learned through those engagement events and activities, led to these maps. And go ahead and jump to the next slide. Let's make sure. So in case we can go past these, just in case these are not super easy, start to focus online and hopefully get a better snapshot of what this looks like. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify connections along the corridor. And for folks who haven't had a chance to read the memo, it's still in draft format, we're still making changes to it. But our focus is really in identifying the right connections along the corridor and stepping away from that to starting to identify what type of facilities do we want to see to support those connections. And so right now, when you're looking at one side of this is pedestrian, the other side is bicycle. And so we start with the pedestrian, that's the one we're looking at right here. First off, we have bright orange is showing what's identified in the transportation system plan. So those are projects, again, mostly focused on the higher classification facilities. And then we have what we're trying to highlight and what is existing there today. What we're proposing are all the other colors. The dark, the purples and the browns and the blues are all things that we're identifying as part of this project. So these corridors are there's a lot of work that kind of supports what we're recommending here, and the type of facilities it can vary based on where you're at, what type of connection you're trying to create. So the slide here shows sidewalks. Most people are familiar with those. Mixed use shoulders. That I believe that one that's shown there is up there on Old River Road, and as you're transitioning up there into the Lake Oswego area, it's just kind of sort of widened, somewhat separated shoulder. We have shared use paths. This can both be within adjacent to the street, as well as separated when you're providing shorter connections between neighborhoods and things. And then we have a variety of enhanced crosswalk treatments. So this map that you're looking at here, two things to take away from it. One are the connections. The next thing is the type of facility that is trying to help achieve those connections. And then the second thing is the crossing locations. So as you look up and down the corridor on Highway 43, there's a number of crosswalks that are being proposed or recommended as part of this. This again came out of that sort of combination of plans as well as the public input. Most of these are located at either signalized intersections or intersections that are currently served by transit, so tending to identify the crosswalks near the transit facilities. And what else? I should mention that while crosswalks are generally well supported along the corridor, they would need to ultimately be evaluated in terms of priority transportation. That's a lot of there's a lot of work that goes into both identifying, establishing, and defining what these crosswalks.
So like whether they have one of these signals or they're just a striped crosswalk, they do that part.
Yes.
Decide that.
They help decide that, or they approve that. Generally, on a 35-mile-per-hour facility with 3 lanes, you're looking at these flashing beacons. More than see just a standard crosswalk. You might go to something like what we call hybrid beacon, which has a stop indication. Or in some cases, I think you guys have some existing pedestrian signals, so it's not unlike a hybrid beacon. Has that right indication stop. I'm kind of pausing here. I don't expect folks that haven't had a chance to read the memo or digest the maps yet to have a lot to say here, but I think what we would want, the type of feedback that we would want is are there other connections that should be emphasized on these, like for pedestrians, and I think we'll talk about bikes in a second. Are there other types of facilities that we should be considering beyond sidewalks, shoulders, shared use paths? I will mention when we switch over to bikes, there's one more thing that we're talking about, and that's this notion of an advisory shoulder or bike lane.
Here's the weird one at 83. It's got a bike lane that's at a different elevation from the sidewalk. Right? It's the weirdest.
That's good. That's on Rosemont today.
It's very,
I mean, that seems dangerous. And
it's a European design that works really well in other countries. Matt knows better than I do.
Okay.
It's interesting.
I think I would like turn and get my bike bills.
It's a good way to indicate, texture, color, and just separation between uses without having to call it out or block it off. You do a small, 2 or 3 inch roll kind of situation.
I think we jump to the next slide. There, I have a couple of those that are shown here. In the bike realm, it's there. So this has a little bit more of a variation. We have shared bikeways. Most folks are familiar with that. That's those are just share signs that are on the ground. Something again called advisory bike lanes. This is going back to our European partners as well as some local communities that have started to embrace this treatment. This is like skip striping along the shoulder and essentially allows vehicles to kind of like use that space to get around each other. There's bike lanes and then there's separated bike facilities, and I got a couple of examples of that. I think that's Rosemont. I found that up. And the other one I think is one on the boulevard. That has that kind of thing that you're talking about, where it's just a little bit of an elevation change, different type of material, so it goes from asphalt to concrete and it goes up. That one, the one on Luna Village, and I'm assuming the one on that, those are good for retrofitting this type of treatment, which we would consider to be somewhat of a separated facility, even though there isn't like a lot of physical separation. There's that piece to it. And the other, whereas the one on Rosemont, where you're actually stepped back behind, I think in this case, the landscape strip adjacent to the sidewalk, asphalt instead of concrete, it creates both that visual separation between the bikes and the lanes, as well as the physical separation between the vehicles. That's kind of becoming a little bit more of the preferred treatment.
It's going to keep you more safe in that painted bike.
Yeah, that one on Rosemont's like separated bike and street.
Yes.
It's a separated shared, which I like.
And that's kind of where the Highway 43, one on the left, bottom left, that's where the Highway 43 concept plan is headed. I don't know, I think it may not be elevating the bike facility, it may actually be just curb separated, but I think when they get to design, they'll probably be absolutely more. It's, how do you guys have it in, Lion Falls Drive, I'm trying to think, that's the one that's west of 10, that area.
Yeah, one false.
Yeah. Similar treatment there. It's, you can probably, from that example, I don't know if you and I talked about this, but certainly Eric and Clark and others at the city have, it's a great tree that provides a nice separation. It can be a little confusing for users because you see people walking in the homes, walking in the back.
Yeah.
See restaurant owners utilizing the full width of the sidewalk space for them taking things all the time.
And also people
Oh, it's,
crossing them don't look to see the bike's
Yeah,
coming. They just walk.
I forget.
For them, there's a little bit of a learning curve with these, but getting back to when you're using them, that separation just makes for a really comfortable space. So again, what we're really trying to do is maybe not necessarily define what treatment goes here. Just building on a conversation.
Yeah.
But more what the connections are and what the range of potential treatments could be based on those connections. And so we're not saying separated bike facilities everywhere or anywhere. It's more like, thing with the exception of 43, that's already been developed as part of the thing. But what if there are connections that need that type of treatment versus bike lanes versus advisory shoulders or should
This is your like map of intentions, not specifics.
Either way, we did get a little bit more specific than we'll probably end up with, just in showing for like bikes where we're looking more like shared. Because a lot of these are local streets. A lot of these are fairly low speed, low volume neighborhood streets where you don't necessarily need to provide a lot of separation. But in some cases, we might want to. And I'm trying to think of an example, like maybe, well, it's hard. I'm trying to think of the name. What's this? Cedar Oak, yeah. So in that area, you might want to see more separation.
Right.
So, right, like in the area of the school. Because you want the, particularly for elementary schools, you want those facilities to be really comfortable with. And so it's
This will be good for the people that live there and have nowhere safe to walk. So this is a big benefit to the neighborhood.
Yeah, and remember, part of this project, sort of the secondary part of this project, is to formalize these connections throughout the corridor adjacent to the highway, on both sides of the highway, so that maybe we don't always have to drive from this point, as Greg kind of had mentioned, right? It's for folks who live in those areas, and for those of us who want to visit, park and walk through the corridor in some format. But we're not ready to just go ahead and blast, trails that block off the highway from north to south. We're trying to utilize spaces that exist and formally connect them in some form. In which case, I think what Matt is saying is, in some cases, it might be, just sort of a shared bikeway, and in others, we might have a separated sidewalk. Robinwood and Bolton neighborhoods have not been incredibly embracing, haven't really desired sidewalks.
I've changed my mind.
Well,
Well, and I will tell you, there's a whole lot of new families.
Yes.
In Robinwood.
Yeah.
And there was a discussion at some meeting, and then a friend of mine who's new to the neighborhood came to the garden the next day and goes, "Why does everybody hate sidewalks?"
Right, I know. And I think that's why what Matt alluded to, we want to respect the Bolton and Rockwood plans, but those are each around 20 years old, and maybe they don't entirely represent the full neighborhood. But it is about respecting those where maybe there's a slice or a section where a new sidewalk or some sort of shared path would work, and others, maybe it's just some striping on the street.
Or even
Be respectful of the plan.
signs that say
Right.
this is a shared street, especially on.
Right, exactly. And that helps us formalize.
On this map, if you go to the end of Kenthorpe, there is a little walkway that goes around the edge of the Lake Oswego water treatment plant that gets you from the end of Kenthorpe walking or biking over to Mapleton. And then the other thing is there's what we call Ole's Bridge, which is from Kempthorpe over to Cedar Oak.
So,
There's a little pathway bridge. It's right before you get to Trillium. And the reason I'm pointing those out is those are really good connection access points for students walking to school.
Yeah.
So the kids that live over here on Mapleton don't have to go up to 43 and around to get to school. They can take the school cut and come out by the water treatment plant and then take over this bridge and then.
Same with the pathway going from Nixon.
Yes,
straight
right,
up
yeah,
by
right.
Nelson.
Valley,
Yeah.
Valley View.
And that's,
Maps used to tell you to turn right there.
Yeah.
but I think that's the heart of what we're trying to accomplish here is there's community benefit and value making these connections. And in some cases, again, I use striping. That's probably the easiest thing we could do. But to formalize it through some striping to sort of show, no, this is okay for pedestrians to be here. This is an okay space for someone to be in, and we want them to be there.
I'm still a big fan. I know the city doesn't want to put new signs everywhere, but I'm a big fan of signs that remind people that these are shared streets.
Well,
The sign has like a picture of a pedestrian and a bicyclist and maybe a stroller, so that the cars driving know to slow down, be cautious, pay attention.
If we get rid of the rocks, plenty of room to rock to walk.
Right, right.
To rocks,
Yeah, just
Massive rocks.
boulders that they put in the right of way.
So when you need to step off the street when a car is coming and you're pushing a stroller, it's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah.
And it's not their property, it's not, they're not supposed to be there.
And people do it because they don't want somebody to park at their house.
Yeah.
Oh, go, do you want to add something?
No.
Okay, so just so I understand the map, between this kind of Walmart area and then down 43 to the market and choice area, is that the 43 transport bike plan? Like, what's gonna happen with that? That's such an important, like, transportation connection for
Yeah.
bikers.
So the 2016 Highway 43 concept plan does provide concept drawings for the entire road. And it's literally from North City Limits to South City Limits. Again, 3-lane cross section, the whole way, separated bike facilities, the whole way.
Okay, so it wouldn't be like it is now. I understand. Okay,
And then
that makes sense.
And that's been included, incorporated in the transportation system plan as well. And not to get too far off the topic here, but pre-pandemic, there was funding for the project and they were starting, but no one started work for us out.
Now they're doing this intersection at Merrill.
Focusing on our
They just started that, yeah.
That's as far as the funding.
$7
can
million.
go.
Roundabout, right? No, just
No,
a four-way intersection.
Be careful.
Four-way intersection, sorry, be careful, it's the way they fit around. Anyway, okay, so I visualize the picture now.
Yeah, right, right.
This was really my question as well. Like, I'm not seeing improvement on Highway 43. For me, I'm not going to take my bike and do what Carol does, which is like in and out for the next 3 miles, which then becomes 6 miles to get from my house to the bridge. I want to see that improvement on 43.
So that's well noted. I think a lot of us would, as we all know, that is ODOT's facility, and in order to make that happen, well, ODOT would have to.
I thought there was conversation about West Penn taking possession of 43.
There is conversation about jurisdictional transfer. ODOT does it in cycles, in basically what is a 2-year cycle. And we would apply theoretically, I believe, at the end of 2025, in hopes of garnering some sort of funding with that transfer. The problem is, I don't know the numbers, so don't take this as gospel, but we would need $30 to $40 million to sort of bring it up to a standard that meets our codes today. So we can't just take the highways. Our 20-year transportation plan is $45 million. That's for everything. So we would need ODOT to give us money at the same time as setting the highways ours. We also don't have sorry, I'll totally give it to Lori. We own one stoplight in the city of West Lynn, and that's up here at Rosemont in Springs. And, anyway, right there. I'm totally blanking right now. The others on the highway are not ours, and we actually contract out with the county to maintain that for us. So if we suddenly now have 4 or 5 more stoplights, we have to think about what does that require from a staffing perspective annually. Who do we have to pay to do that? What's the contract with the county, with the state? So there's a lot that goes on with owning a highway all of a sudden that we don't own today. So it is a conversation, but it's a very big conversation.
And we're in, we said maybe part of the first paragraph of a 400-page book.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. I think there's some strong feelings that, well, if we can get the amount of money we would need, then it's probably in West Lynn's best interest to do that. But again, it's the first of many conversations to go.
There is a plan that shows
Yes.
proposed improvements that's been adopted that shows proposed improvements. Yeah, so but it's a matter of.
And so my position on this, and I need a lot more of this conversation. I need a lot more information, but I believe it's something like 40,000 trips a day on Highway 43. And I don't know what percentage of those are actual Westland residents versus people just driving through.
Yeah.
Even if we had a pristine, brand new, beautiful, shiny highway that we were taking ownership of, what would be the ongoing maintenance that's required? And if you look around the city, we don't have the capacity or the funding to keep all the rest of our streets and roads in really good condition. So adding that on, I think, would be a big change. Also, like I said, this is we've just had the first couple of sentences of this discussion. We need a lot more information before I would even want to put in to request that jurisdiction transfer. I know the mayor has been looking into this. He's got more information than I do on it, and he's kind of excited about it, but I have.
I'll say 2 quick things and then we can move on. One of the things we absolutely would need if we want to have that conversation with RODOT is a plan and a vision. We have the infrastructure plan from 2016 that Matt alluded to, and then this would be the other part of that. So we're headed in that direction. And then the other part I was going to say I'm completely blanking on, so I guess it didn't matter. So we can move on. In about 3 minutes, I'm going to go, oh, that's what I wanted to say. Then no, I will hold that up.
Yeah, we're doing good on.
Well, that might be a first for us.
We're ahead. Pretty much.
Oh, don't feel that.
Unless there's more comments on this. Any thoughts on anything you see on the maps? Pages, sayings, the types of things, and recognizing it's a lot of information. And yes. So if you think of stuff later, just let us know. And we sent you I think we sent you this memo prior to the last meeting, so it's in your inboxes somewhere. So it's fine if you don't have more comments, we'd love to get them today, but if you don't, take another look at it, I'm just email it.
Well, and again, any other thoughts? I think Councilor Bright had brought up signage and whatnot, and I believe in the current budget cycle we're in, we actually have an amount of money for a branding and wayfinding project. And I've been kind of bending ears of leadership, not elected leadership, but staff leadership, that would be a great, utilizing that to help us formalize these connections along the highway would be a great way to spend our money.
So that you would have when you're walking in.
Yeah.
But you can see the sign that says, if you turn right here, you can be heading to. the
Right here,
library.
0.3 miles to library, like, oh, cool, that kind of thing. So they do it in other cities, you see it in parks and whatnot. So I've been kind of nudging that as much as I can until folks get too annoyed with me. Because I think that would be a cool way to kind of start that process throughout the city, like utilizing it in corridor, because it's a pretty messy. When you try to walk through the neighborhoods, it's pretty messy. We're not all Councilor Bright over here.
We're not gridded.
Yeah,
No, they're secret.
Yes, exactly.
My neighbor's like,
Well, sometimes you feel like you're in someone's yard, or like,
Yeah.
am I allowed to be here?
Well,
You know,
sometimes they want you to think that
that you're in their yard, that's right. So anyway, so that's something that's been kind of buzzing around in my head that I think is worth.
So years ago, we had a small group of us that called ourselves the Trails Advisory Committee. And it was Roger Shepherd, and he used to be the GIS guy for the city of Lake Oswego, and he was on West A, and my husband and I, and several other people, Alma, and we would meet on Saturday mornings, and we would walk around the city, typically on right-of-ways. And sometimes they were blocked up with people's garden beds or other plantings and stuff, but we would walk on these right-of-ways all through the community. And I have a bunch of those maps. My husband said, because Roger would print out maps for us every Saturday, and I have a whole bunch of those maps. So.
Are they reflected in here, or do you know? Or do you
Some of them are, like the Valley View terrace that goes from Cedar Oak to down to Nixon is on there. I think some of them are, but anyway, it was an interesting exercise. We did this for like 2 or 3 years, and part of it was Ken Wooster was the parks director at the time, and he didn't want parks employees to confront people about encroaching on the right of way, but he thought it just as citizens wandering around that it might be perceived a little better.
Any other thoughts? Anybody online?
Anybody online have thoughts?
Oh, no, Greg's hand has been up the whole time. We just didn't know that. Awesome. All right. So then we're on to the next steps.
Yeah, we may actually let you
Wow.
eat early. Fitment and punished. I don't know.
We've already answered this question.
We talked about this, yeah. So really just kind of next steps. So couple things. One, drafting the zoning recommendations based on what we heard from you, based on more documents about specific standards, and based on some conversation with the development community as well. So kind of all that will then go into drafting the specific standards that would be part of this new mixed use zone that would apply in these areas we've been looking at. And then also we are planning for a workshop or open house in approximately, say it's
July.
I think they're July, yeah.
early July, yeah, like first couple weeks, not on July 4th. But sometime I think between either just before or just after tax holiday, not like day in that vicinity. That's what we're looking at. We'll continue to work on revise the transportation recommendations that we talked about today. And then we're also starting really now to kind of outline the other. So it's sort of 2 main final products here. One is the zone, the new mixed use zone, and the map we're going to apply. And 2 is the draft forward master plan that incorporates all the things that we've been doing, including the transportation connectivity recommendations. So we're working on that now in terms of at least outlining it, putting together kind of, but here's what it's going to look like. Yeah, so that's happening really kind of currently, and it will pull in again information we've already prepared, start putting it together, and then add to it with the other things that are in process now. So that's sort of generally where we are. We've in terms of meetings, we had our bonus meeting today. So thank you all for doing an extra meeting. Yeah, thank you. And it was great to just be able to have that time on this stuff. And then we're tentatively looking at the next meeting for this group in June. So things want to kind of vet some of the stuff that we can take into the open house, and also just kind of talk about that. And to get another look at what we come up with at that point, the zoning recommendation. I don't know that we're anticipating having a draft of the working plan, but at least is outlined and a sense of what that's like. So that is where we're headed. Miss anything? No, me too. You nailed it. Okay. Yes.
Didn't realize that we didn't approve the minutes. Right? Is that something we did too?
In a working group, I don't think we typically do that. I'm kind of looking at you.
This is officially a council, city council, city appointed working group at the city council, so yes, you do have to.
We do.
You do have to put on your minutes.
Then do we want to do?
And so it's on here, it's in this
Okay.
packet.
Take a charge. Good for you.
So, are these minutes approved? Is there a motion to approve the minutes from March 6th?
Give everyone a few minutes to peruse those minutes.
Any comments on the minutes, anyone online?
No, I perused the minutes. They look fine to me, but I do need to abstain because I wasn't able to attend.
The minutes look good and I motion to approve them.
Second.
Second, all in.
On favor? Right. Aye. Or
I
thumbs
see a
up.
lot of thumbs up and hands raised. That's a good sign.
Approved.
All right.
No, that has to be
Yeah.
clarified. Yeah, perhaps it's in the minutes, but we have sucked out 7-2, right?
Yes. Yes.
Even though it shows up on this map, this is gone.
Yeah, that'll get back.
Oh, yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
Wait there.
It's, yeah, what we basically said was we didn't think that made a lot of sense. Having a mixed use designation. Yep. But it's still a potential opportunity area for housing in the future. But yeah, we kind of pulled it out as a.
Yeah, and that housing can be done through our current code now, so it didn't make sense to make changes to it.
This is adjacent to the church.
It's that church.
It's that property, yeah.
Yeah,
It's from church.
Very small.
correct, correct. Yeah. One to the south of Marias.
So,
Well, I just want to say we had a lot of public input at the early on in this about a lowered speed limit on Highway 43, which I personally think is still a good idea. And I know that there's a process that we have to go through with ODOT. I just wonder if that's still something that people are thinking about.
Yeah, it still comes up pretty regular. Anytime I'm out and about or in a neighborhood association meeting, it generally comes up as do the crosswalks. Because you know, the crosswalks are connected to the project as we talk about neighborhood connectivity, right? The speed limit is something we'll just have to maybe put forward to the technical advisory group. Take care of that. And then I think public works and engineering need to do that for, see if that's something we want.
It just seems to me that the crosswalk issue could be a little easier perhaps if the speed limit on the highway was lower.
Yeah.
Such a mess, all the traffic. It's like, then it just pushes people to Rosemont. And just cruising up Rosemont. It's just,
Well, the speed limit on those ones. That's why
It's-
it's younger.
now it's 40, where it's in the county area.
Oh,
And that area
Counts, yes.
so much traffic there, because they're pushing off the other roads.
So Spencer, I was wondering if we could go around the room and just have people give just quick, maybe 15-second feedback.
You don't want to let us out early.
Well, somebody
We got them in the room. I can't let you go.
on just where we're at in the whole process, because I know we didn't really get a chance to check in with some of the people online about their comments.
If you have.
If you have something to say, you can pass.
Anything you have. Feeling good. Thumbs up.
I'm excited. I want to, over here, just my knowledge is just going. And I would love to see where the old McDonald's and all that area, just be a North Village. We have a Central Village. I would love to see a North Village. We have a theme. I would love to see a village bus that is free to the community that goes back and forth just on a looping So as we build this stuff and you have housing and somebody's here and they want to go get bougie groceries at Market of Choice, it's great to get over here who wants cheaper groceries at Walmart, or you want to go out to dinner and you want to go to Eldon's, and you just have this bus that just rotates and it's an app with a no set time. It just keeps going. Jump on, jump off, and bring that connectivity together. That's what we're missing here. Is Willamette has its own lovely thing. I would love to have this village on this side. You have such village in our village learning together. And this beautiful park in the middle. I mean, we are just such an awesome location to make this happen. It's really cool.
I second that.
Go ahead, Greg.
I second those comments. That's just spot on. This is a good long-term process, and it's been real enjoyable and an impressive process to date. I appreciate all the input across the board.
I would say generally, it's hard to imagine why people would say, yeah, to this, to what we've done so far. I think I'm hoping there'll be a lot of support, and it feels like it's following what you guys learned at the beginning of this, of what people want. So
I went with Chris to a lot of, and Lynn and a lot of these, group things. I did talk to one of our community members who likes it the way it is, doesn't want any changes.
Yep.
That's one out of hundreds of people that I've talked to.
I think I had a fairly stunned look on my face when I heard that from him. I was like, really? Okay.
Bo, Russell, Molly?
I got my mic on. I'm all good. Very good job. Very impressive.
Thank you for being here too. Appreciate it.
Russell, is that you, Molly?
Yeah.
And we can see the top.
Russell.
Oh, wait. Let's unmute you, Molly.
On the right hand side, upper right.
Yeah, there it is.
Send it.
Oh, we don't have, there you go. We don't have you hooked up. Molly, we can't hear you.
Sorry, Molly. You look enthusiastic.
Send email me your comments. Email some comments.
Councilor Lewis, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I'm just broadly really supportive. I think it's been a great process. I think that the jurisdictional transfer question and future transit service and future bike ped service questions all depend on funding, which is obviously hard to predict the future, but the opportunity to get people moving through this, but also finding their community needs met on this corridor, super exciting to me. And I think we've landed on kind of the right set of options. I would hope that this process could be replicated for other corridor plans. I've obviously been able to be a part of several, but this has gone really well and it's moved. I mean, it feels slow on our end, but it's moved faster than others I've been part of. So cheers to the team for moving quickly.
Thank you. Good job, yeah, I certainly appreciate that feedback. I think from the city perspective, I want to say thank you all. I mean, we're not done yet. And Councilor Lewis is right. I know it feels slow, but to some of us, it feels like we are on a rocket ship and I can't stick it down. So it feels extremely fast with some of the work stuff that we have to get done and the meetings and whatnot. It's speeding up right now. We're kind of like at the top of that roller coaster. Well, I'm just throwing out all metaphors and analogies I can, but I will say to Spencer's comment, for most of the surveys and the feedback and what we land somewhere between about 80 to 85% kind of highly supportive. Yeah. And that's that to us is that's a landslide victory. Yeah. Anytime you can get 80% of anyone to agree on something, you're killing it. You're doing a great job. So we've been really feeling like we are headed in the direction the community wants us to go, and that's very exciting for us. And support from Councilor Lewis and Metro and State Rep Jules Walters and our Senate President Rob Wagner out of Lake Oswego. We've had a lot of good support. I hope that we can take this vision and actually go out and find funding to help do some stuff that we want to do. So it's a pretty exciting time for Westland. We're starting to grow up a little bit. We're not the small town we used to be. We're kind of a small city now, you know, kind of have to level up, and it's exciting. I can't thank Councilor Bright enough for the support. She's been a champion of the project. I look to her regularly for support and cover when people are upset. And hide behind Councilor Bright. The elected's jobs are never done. But thank you all for being here and continuing. And Greg, I certainly am going to pick your brain a little bit about some of that development stuff, because it's really the big concern from the staff level we have is that we over standard and we keep people from wanting to do anything. And that's a big concern of ours, and I want to continue to pick your brain. So I would just say thank you all for being here and investing this time. It's a good thing for our community, and hopefully we'll all get to see some of it come to fruition before we're no longer here. Either living here or just alive. You know, we're just alive. So
It's 20 years down the road. I need that bus to be free.
Yeah.
That's right.
And ADA.
And EDA, that's right. We like that. We like that. I'm with you on that one. I'll be right there.
Okay, thank you,
All right.
everyone.
All right.
Thank you all.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Meeting adjourned.
Awesome.